Okay, so I hope in my talk today that I will convince you that studying number, I don't think most of you don't need to be convinced of this, but is an exciting test bed for many questions that are central to cognitive science. And humans, as you all know, are the only species capable of doing things like this: building bridges, designing airplanes to fly around the world, creating and using monetary systems. And none of this would be possible without symbols for number. So we are using a uniquely human capacity that many would argue is one of the major hallmarks of human cognition when we do any of these things. But as I'll show you today, we share with animals and human infants a more basic system for representing number. So by studying the numerical abilities of monkeys and human infants, my hope is to understand the evolutionary and developmental building blocks available for the construction of the human mathematical mind. So the first part of what I want to do today is just talk about this nonverbal system, this non-symbolic system for representing number. And in animals and infants, show you both behavioral and some neurobiological evidence that we share this system with animals and babies. And then the second part is a little more controversial. I will marshal evidence that this system is meaningfully related to symbolic mathematics and talk about the relationship between what I'm calling the approximate number system, or has been called the approximate number system, and uniquely human mathematics. So the study of number representations in animals is old. It's been happening for over 100 years. Early studies were plagued by issues of stimulus control. It's a very challenging question to ask whether a nonverbal creature is using number as opposed to one of many of the different dimensions that typically co-vary with number in the world. But there are many different research groups using very stringent stimulus controls with many different species of animals and many different clever experimental paradigms now. And I'll show you an example of this from our lab. So this is part of Jessica Cantlin's dissertation a long time ago. And what you see is the monkey starting each trial by pressing this open square and then pressing the stimulus that has the smaller numerosity and then the larger number of elements second. So you can see that the monkey is ignoring the location of the individual squares within each stimulus, the size of the individual squares, the color of the individual squares, and choosing the smaller and then the larger numerosity. And what we see in this kind of task is that performance, both accuracy and reaction time, is modulated by the ratio between the two numerical values. So as the ratio approaches 1, you see that accuracy decreases and reaction time increases in this task. And in fact, the open symbols are data from college students, and the closed symbols are data from monkeys, and you can see that they perform very similarly in this task. So what this suggests is that the representation for number is an analog magnitude. So we'll kind of use these various terms, analog magnitude, mental magnitudes, approximate number system, all to refer to the same general idea that that Weber's law controls discrimination. So even though number is a property of discrete individuals out there in the world, the representation underlying the numerical representations is continuous. So a similar question has been asked in human infants. There are many different studies, early ones focusing on the visual habituation paradigm, to ask whether infants can discriminate numerical values. And the basic idea is that infants are shown different stimuli that all have the same number of elements until their looking time decreases, and then they're shown new stimuli that have either the same number or a novel number of elements. And in many of these different studies, what was shown is that infants succeed when large values are being used. Infants succeed when the ratio is large enough. So this was the first study with large numbers, large numerosities by Fei Xu and Liz Spelke. And they showed that 6-month-old infants dishabituated, showed a recovery of looking time when there was a 1-to-2 ratio change. When they were habituated to 8 or 16, they looked longer at the other numerosity, but they were unable to do 2-to-3 ratio at this age. So in general, through many different studies of infants using visual habituation paradigm, using other procedures as well, like an auditory visual preference paradigm, there's this pattern of infants succeeding at a given ratio and failing at a more difficult ratio, and there's a developmental trajectory to this as well. So this is certainly suggestive of Weber's law, but as you can see, it's very different, that kind of binary success versus failure pattern, very different evidence than this kind of psychophysical function. And so Melissa Libertas in my lab adapted a program, a procedure, visual change detection procedure, to try and address this question of ratio dependence in infants. So rather than describe this figure, I'll just show you what it looks like when the infant is actually doing the task. So this gets the infant's attention. It's just an attractor stimulus. Before you look at the stimuli, just watch his eyes. So just see how he's looking back and forth between the two streams, and then he's fixating on this one. So now if you look at the stimuli, you can see that this one is alternating between 10 and 20 dots. And this one is a constant 10 dots. So for other infants, this would be a constant 20 dots, for example. And so the question here is whether the infant prefers to look at the numerically changing stream, and how the ratio differences here controls that preference. Sadly, this is the only baby that was that excited by black dots on a white screen. Okay, so what we see, these are different groups of infants, and this ratio reflects the numerical ratio in the changing stream. So the constant stream always had the smaller or larger numerosity for a given infant. And the one that the baby that you saw was looking at a 1-to-2 ratio, and you can see that that group of infants shows a significant preference for looking at the numerically changing stream. So this is the percent of time looking to the changing minus the percent of time looking to the constant stream. And what's interesting about this is that you see that the preference scores increase with the ratio in the changing stream. So we were excited about this for a number of reasons, because it first of all, provides stronger evidence for Weber's law in infant numerical discriminations. And we were also excited about it because the scores at 6 months in this task predicted scores at 9 months in this task. So we saw stability in this measure. And we also saw a lot of individual variance, and so I'll return to that in a little bit with another study. Another important aspect of these approximate number representations is that they are either amodal, cross-modal, supramodal, transmodal. Was that Alfonso? In that monkeys appreciate the relationship between the number of things they see and the number of things they hear. So this is an example of a monkey doing a matching task based on number. So here you've got a double whammy of visual and auditory information in the stimulus. Is that a little too loud for everybody? Okay. So the monkey is matching the number they see and hear, but you're going to see in a moment there will be trials where there's only auditory information and no visual information in the sample. So here's a visual-only sample, and I believe the next one is an auditory-only sample. And what we find in this task is, again, that accuracy is controlled by the ratio. Okay, so here's an auditory-only stimulus, and of course we train with particular numerical values and then test with novel values to see whether the monkey has actually mastered the task. And here you can see, I'll just turn the sound off now. Here you can see that accuracy is modulated by the ratio between the correct and the incorrect value in the choice, but more importantly, that performance looks very similar when there's a visual or an auditory sample. And we've looked at similar things in infants. This was our attempt at a natural stimulus presentation. Not so natural, I guess. But for monkeys, it seemed pretty natural because it was the number of monkeys vocalizing. And we played choruses of monkey calls. And we found, I think I don't have the monkey data in here, but we found a similar pattern in babies and in monkeys where they preferred to look at the matching visual information. And Veronique Guizard, who's here, has shown in newborns that there is also this cross-modal matching. So this is a particularly impressive study because not only does it show cross-modal matching in infants, but it shows it in newborn infants and with large values as well. So the study I just showed you was only with 2 and 3 faces. So this suggests another aspect, not just this cross-modal point, but also the fact that these representations are spontaneous and emerging extremely early in human development. And work by Giorgio Villartegara and his colleagues has shown this in newborn chicks as well. So it seems to be these kinds of representations emerge extremely early in development in both animals and humans. Another very important aspect of the approximate number representations is that they support arithmetic, so they can enter into arithmetic calculations. So this is another study of Jessica's, where you can see that the monkey is presented with an array and then another array and has to choose the sum of those 2 arrays. So here, okay, we'll ignore that one for a moment. That wasn't addition. Here we go. So there's a large quantity, another large quantity, and one of those is the sum. So what she showed in this task, and she's done this with subtraction as well, addition and subtraction, that monkeys' choices, decisions are based again on the ratio between the correct value and the distractor. So these are 2 different monkeys, and accuracy is modulated by the ratio between the correct and incorrect value in these problems. And some of you may be familiar with Karen Wynn's work on addition and subtraction in infants. Most of those studies, the early studies using a violation of expectancy procedure, were with very small values, but she has, with Colleen McCrink, showed that even with large values, that infants track objects in this kind of task, seemingly using approximate number representations. So when shown 5 objects plus another 5 objects, they look longer when you show them some anomalous outcome as opposed to 10 objects. More recently, we've been trying to look at whether monkeys can do something akin to multiplication. And this may be more like repeated addition, but but of course that's how children initially learn multiplication as well. So the basic idea is that the monkey is presented with some number of occluders on a touch screen and shown what's under one of the occluders. So, and it's always the same numerosity under all of the occluders. So the question is whether they can infer that the correct numerosity is the number of occluders times the number of elements that they've seen under one of the occluders. And in fact, Sarah Jones has shown that monkeys do in fact transfer this kind of problem to new numerical values. So just for example here, when there is one occluder with 3 values under it versus 2 occluders with 3 values under each, you can see that the pattern of response is here. Fei Xu has shown that infants make statistical inferences in this very clever procedure where infants are shown an array with a certain number of green, or a ratio of green to red balls, for example, or in this case I believe it was lollipops. And a set is taken out of this box, and it either is, as you would expect, a probable outcome or an improbable outcome. Let's see, I should have looked at this more carefully because I'm not sure exactly how to interpret that. But the basic idea is that infants are surprised if they see a box that has mostly green balls in it and a few red, and yet an experimenter pulls a sample out that has the majority red balls and only one green ball, for example. So there are now many studies that suggest that infants later in the first year of life are making these statistical inferences. So recently we did a similar study with monkeys where we trained them that one of these two symbols would give reward and the other one wouldn't, and then asked whether they could compare these different sets to choose the set that would give them the more likely chance of success. So the better ratio of favorable to unfavorable items. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to very quickly show you this. So this is accuracy and reaction time, and you can see that what controls performance, even in novel trials, probe trials that the monkey has never seen before, is the ratio of ratios. So not only are the monkeys attending to the ratio in a given array, but they're comparing the ratios in these two arrays. So all of these are different signatures of this approximate number system. And there's also very clear evidence that it seems to be homologous neural substrates that are important in animals, in adult humans, and very early in human development. So work by Stan DeHaan and many others has shown that the intraparietal sulcus is very important for representing number in humans and adults. And it appears that regions of parietal cortex are also very important in monkeys, but this is still an interesting developing story. So Andreas Nieder has shown in the ventral intraparietal region that there are neurons that seem to have a labeled line code. So neurons in VIP that when he records from them in a match to sample task in very well-trained monkeys who are doing tasks similar to the ones that I've shown you, there are neurons that fire maximally to a given value. So in this case, I believe that's the blue is 1, there we go, and the red is 5. So this is a neuron that prefers the value 1, and this is a neuron that prefers the value 5, and you can see that firing rate decreases as a function of distance from the preferred numerical value in VIP, the ventral intraparietal area. Jamie Reutman has shown that neurons in the lateral intraparietal area show a very different response function. So in this case, the monkeys, the neurons in LIP in untrained monkeys that were not doing any kind of numerical task, show one of these two profiles. Firing rate either increases or decreases with numerical value, but they don't show this kind of labeled line code. So Nick DeWind, working with me and Michael Platt, was interested in this question of the difference between VIP and LIP, and whether training had something to do with it. So how training the monkey on these tasks might change the response properties of the neurons. And interestingly, he recorded from about 100 neurons in VIP, so the same region that Andreas has been recording from. And he actually found in these untrained monkeys only a very small percentage of neurons that were numerosity selective. And the symbols here are not important, but they're all different continuous magnitudes, so things like total surface area. So you can see that the neurons in LIP in monkeys that are not trained to do a numerical task are actually showing a very diverse profile of sensitivity to different quantity dimensions and not much to numerosity at all. So he was interested in so I want to make sure that everyone is clear that obviously I've shown you behaviorally that the monkeys can make numerical discriminations, but of course we don't have to have single neurons that are showing a labeled line code in order to make these behavioral discriminations. So those are two very orthogonal questions. So he wanted to ask whether if we used the population of neurons, whether that would retrieve the numerosity information. So he developed a classifier that used a model of to calculate Weber fraction that actually incorporates different continuous magnitudes in the model. He showed that when he used the classifier just on the very few numerosity neurons, that it was not good at retrieving the numerical values of the stimuli at all. But when he used the full population, even though most of those neurons were not numerosity selective, that in fact it did a much better job, a very good job of predicting the numerical value of the stimulus. So most of the work with humans, with adults, has focused on symbolic number representations, but there is this wonderful study by Manuela Piazza and colleagues that shows that when adults look at numerosity, that recovery of the bold signal is proportional to the change in numerosity in an event-related adaptation paradigm. So here, when people are looking at habituated to the value 16, for example, recovery of the bold signal is here for 8 and here for 32, for example, and this is when they're habituated to 32. And this is the case in the intraparietal sulcus, and it appears not to work for changes in shape, for example. So in this kind of paradigm, the IPS is showing selective recovery to numerosity and not shape, and it's showing this in a ratio-dependent manner. And back to our point about the homologous neural substrates in development and in animals, Jessica has shown that using a very similar procedure with 4-year-old children, that it's the IPS that shows selective recovery to numerosity and not to shape. And in fact, there's other evidence that even in human infants, that the right IPS seems to be important for representing numerosity. So, I don't know how I'm doing on time, but that's the first part, and I'll make the second part more brief. So, what does this mean? Why is it relevant? So first, it's fascinating that there is this system in animals and infants, but what does it mean for our understanding of the uniquely human mathematical mind? Does it support mathematical representations throughout our lifespan? How does it continue to relate to symbolic mathematics? So clearly, these are very different kinds of representations. So Arabic numerals allow all sorts of computation that approximate number representations do not. And of course, we can appreciate that 2033 is one more than 2032 when we use symbols, and we cannot do anything like that with approximate number representations. They are limited in that they are modulated by Weber's law. So these are very different representational systems, and yet there is growing evidence that there is a strong relationship between these systems nevertheless. So first of all, there's no debate over the idea that when we see Arabic numerals in many contexts, we do retrieve these kind of mental magnitude representations. So the classic study by Moyer and Landauer showed that when adults are just given symbols and asked to choose the smaller or the larger, they also show this kind of Weber's law behavior in reaction time, suggesting that they're operating on these kinds of representations. But I want to briefly touch on these different sources of evidence that the approximate number system seems to be linked in a more meaningful way to mathematical representations. So first of all, the first study to suggest that there is actually a correlation between your ability to make numerosity comparisons and your ability to solve mathematical problems was done by Justin Halberda, Michelle Mazoka, and Lisa Feigenson. And what they showed was that the Weber fraction in children from age 5 all the way to age, two measures of symbolic math at age 5 all the way to age 14 were predicted by Weber fraction at age 14. So this is surprising, your ability to compare numerosities, that it would be related to your performance on a mathematical achievement task. And yet it was an assumption of the idea that this system is foundational for symbolic mathematics. So since this study, there have been many attempts to look at this in many different age groups, and there are now questions in this field that I'm not focusing on today, is how children learn the meaning of number words to begin with. And there are some very interesting hypotheses about this, and Susan Carey has suggested that children are actually mapping initial number words onto another kind of early nonverbal representation of number, object file representations, not approximate number representations. And for lack of time, I can't go into the whole idea here, but I just wanted to bring up this evidence because I think it's interesting. It should be incorporated into any account of how children first learn the meaning of number words. Because one possibility is that doesn't happen until after children have truly mastered the verbal counting system and understand how counting works, and that it's kind of a later byproduct. And another possibility is that it's doing part of the work, or that it's involved in how children first learn the meaning of number words. And Michal Pinhas used an EEG paradigm to address this question. So young children who were at varying stages of understanding the meaning of number words were shown numerosities and heard number words. So they might see 6 basketballs and hear, look, 3, or they might hear, look, 6. And the question is whether we would see an incongruity effect, an EEG incongruity effect in this task, and this is a task that's been used in the word learning literature in young children frequently, but hadn't been used with number. So she time-locked the EEG to the onset of number words in the presentation, and the same children, their given number task was used to look at their knowledge of the cardinal principle, so whether they had mastered the full range of numerical values. And what she found is that, first of all, children who had mastered the cardinal principle, but also children who had only partially, so what Susan Carey's group calls subset knowers, children who only partially understood the meaning of number words, only a few of the number words, showed, first of all, a negative polarity incongruency response shown here. So both the subset knowers and the cardinal principle knowers show this incongruity effect here. So from about 200 to 500 milliseconds after the number word onset. But more importantly, that there was this later positivity in the subset knowers and the cardinal principle knowers that was modulated by distance. So why this is interesting is that it suggests that 3 to 5 knowers, children who have not yet fully mastered the cardinal principle, have yet mapped number words onto approximate number representations. So it rules out at least the idea that one needs to be a cardinal principle knower and understand the full verbal counting system before children map approximate number representations onto number words. And the final source of evidence that we've been working on lately is getting away from all of these correlational questions and trying to ask the question of whether there is a causal relationship between the approximate number system and symbolic mathematics. So this is work by Jun-Koo Park using a pre-test and post-test design where he's asking whether training some aspect of the approximate number system changes performance in a mathematical task. So here's the training that he developed. So these are college students. They're watching 2 sets go behind an occluder and asked which is the sum. Here's another kind of addition trial, same kind of addition event, that set plus that set, but now you're asked, is it more or less than this? And the same thing for subtraction. So that set minus a subset, and which one is the difference? So as you can see, it's challenging, but the task is titrated. It gets more difficult as the subjects master it. And what we find is that, first of all, performance does increase across 10 sessions of 30 minutes each, so a reasonable amount of training here. But more importantly, that when we look at the standardized gain score in solving 2- and 3-digit symbolic addition and subtraction problems, we see that the adults that were trained on the approximate arithmetic training condition, in gray here, showed a benefit at post-test relative to pre-test in the math measure. A no-contact control group did not show that benefit. And when we used a vocabulary pre- and post-test assessment, we saw no difference between the groups and no benefit. So of course, there's lots of problems with no contact control groups, and at this point we've done many other kinds of control groups. So numeral ordering training and knowledge training, and I'll just skip to that, and a variety of other kinds of training. So you might think about what are the different cognitive components that are in this approximate arithmetic task, and one that comes to mind is spatial memory. Keeping these numerosity sets in memory. And so we did a Corsi block training, for example. And in all of these different control tasks, none of them showed the same benefit as the approximate arithmetic group. So we've now been trying to look at this in preschool children. You can imagine that it might be more useful in preschool children than in college students to do this kind of approximate arithmetic training. So young children, before they are ready for arithmetic drills, for example, and worksheets, we might be able to improve their math readiness by training them with these kinds of nonverbal tasks. And so that's something that we've been working on in a variety of different samples. And here's an example of the...
Pop the red balloon. Look, some palm trees are going in the box.
Okay, that's
More
odd.
palm trees are going into the box.
The sound is going, but
Catch
not the video, so I'll pause that.
Sure.
Okay. So this is a child version of the same kinds of task that you saw for adults. And again, what we're finding is that children who are trained with this approximate arithmetic game compared to, in this case, a memory game, are showing a benefit in post-test compared to pre-test in the test of early mathematical achievement. And we're not seeing the same difference in a task that measures vocabulary, PPVT. So to conclude, hopefully I've shown you lots of evidence for this approximate number system in animals and infants. But the bigger question is how it, at this point, is how it relates to symbolic mathematics. And I've shown you a variety of different pieces of evidence that suggest that it is meaningfully related, but I haven't really talked at all about the mechanism. So, how do these approximate number representations aid us in symbolic mathematics? So this is something we're very interested in. And just to give you a little idea of what the direction we're thinking, one of them is that this approximate arithmetic task, of course, is the operations of addition and subtraction. So the actual overlap in the conceptual algorithm of addition and subtraction we think is very important. And in fact, we have tried other tasks where we're doing just numerosity comparison, for example, and that does not seem to show the same benefit in symbolic arithmetic. But the other possibility is that these approximate number representations are helping us to ground symbolic representations throughout the lifespan, and that they help us, for example, in error detection and other aspects that are a little peripheral but part of symbolic number representation. So a really important aspect is honing in on what we mean by symbolic mathematical representation. So operationally, what I've shown you is particular calculations, 2- and 3-digit arithmetic, for example. So I want to thank the many different students who were responsible for all of this data, and I'll be happy to take questions.